it's Elena, and do you freak out every time you break out? Well, I've got one word for you: proactive. There's a huge reason Proactive is the #1 acne treatment in the country. It totally works. Prescription-grade Proactive heals your acne, even prevents future breakouts. How great is that? And there's a reason why so many celebrities use Proactive. Their faces are their money. And I'm telling you, it's time to get it, because Proactive has set up a special dedicated 800 number for our listeners. So get ready to punch that number into your phone. Pull over if you have to. Here's the deal. $19.95, you get Proactive, plus a rotating deep cleansing brush. It's valued at $45. That's yours for free. So is the shipping. For only $19.95, you, my friends, are guaranteed to get clear and stay clear, or you'll get your money back. Here's the number: 1-800-543-3313. Call for a lifetime of beautiful skin. Tell them Elena sent you. Call 1-800-543-3313.
Are you prepared to defend yourself and your family against any threat? Veteran-owned and operated One Shot Trading Post is ready to make sure that you are. Continuing training and classes on defense, survival, and weapons. Full gunsmithing services, special orders and financing available with military discounts. $15 transfers, and One Shot Trading Post is always looking to buy, sell, or trade. Located at 4366 Holland Road at South Plaza Trail, make sure that you're ready for anything at One Shot Trading Post. 463-5893, OneShotTradingPost.com.
We talk about it all the time on the show. Are you safe and secure online? Are you private? Leo Laporte here, the tech guy. Well, I've always said if you're on the internet, you're in public, but there are things you can do to protect yourself a little bit. You certainly should know what the risks are. We talk about that each and every week, plus all the latest news, gossip, and tech support. It's coming up this weekend right here with me, Leo Laporte, the tech guy.
Saturdays 8 p.m., Sundays 6 p.m. on K-Talk 1650.
RM Designs T-shirt printing and more is located in Smithfield, but serves all of Hampton Roads. They specialize in vinyl design shirts, apparel, window stickers, cups, and other specialty gifts. They also have rhinestone and embroidery designed apparel, and they offer Pandora-style beads and hardware to create a one-of-a-kind piece of jewelry. RM Designs T-shirt printing and more caters to businesses, sports teams, churches, groups, and family reunions. They also offer a great fundraising package should you be in need of money for a special project. And they also do home parties if you and your friends would like to get together and make your own creations. RM Designs T-shirt printing and more can be reached at 757-255-9140. That's 757-255-9140. Email them at rmdesigns11@aol.com or find them on Facebook at RM Twisted Designs. You can also place orders directly off their store at storeenvy.com/RM Twisted Designs.
Good afternoon. This is George Yates, and it's Justice for All. For the next hour, we are going to be broadcasting you here from WHKT Talk Radio. 454-1650 is our phone number if you want to call in. And today is a show where we're going to be talking about the death penalty. And it's one of our kind of recurring themes. We've had the people from the Innocence Project on several of our shows. We've had trial lawyers that have defended people charged with capital crimes. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I've defended people charged with capital murder. I go to these seminars every year up in Richmond where we certify ourselves to be, capital murder certified in order to do defense work. But more and more, you're seeing that the death penalty is being applied less and less because of various societal, so many people are becoming more and more against the death penalty, but we still do have the death penalty in the United States. And people are still being executed, although much more rarely now, and being tried for capital murder much more rarely. Today, Matthew Mangino is with us. He wrote a book called The Executioner's Toll, 2010. And he chose 2010 to be the year that he would profile every person that was executed in America. That would be all 50 states although not all 50 states execute people anymore. And we have him here on the show today to talk about this book called Executioner's Toll, the crimes, arrests, trials, appeals, last meals, and final words and executions of 46 persons in the United States. How are you doing today? Is it Mangino or Mangino?
It's Mangino.
Mangino. You know, as soon as I said that, I knew I'd pronounced it incorrectly. Well, you know, it's a kind of a difficult book to get through in some ways, because you read about these horrific crimes and then these people who are then executed. Yeah, I'm not quite sure where to start with this one. I'm from Virginia. I did read, of course, I've scanned through the entire book, and I did read with quite interest the people that were executed in my home state. What is it about this project that got you started in doing a project such as this? Why did you choose the year 2010?
Well, George, the reason I picked a specific year was because when people write about the death penalty, they tend to write it from a certain bias. That they're either for it or against it, and much of what they write about tends to support that position. What I thought would be a good idea would be to look at every execution in a single year, whether those executions were executions that the death penalty abolitionists were using in their arguments, or whether it was an execution that pro-death penalty people were pointing out as to the reasons why we have the death penalty. So it would be an unbiased effort to look at all the executions in a single year and let the reader decide how they feel about the death penalty as they go through the book.
Yeah, it's you do get through various ones. Some of the I kind of got my first thought when I went through the book was I'm going to kind of focus on what their last words were. Mm-hmm. So I went through and read just about through everybody's last words, and I was fascinated at the different things that people say. And I would guess that your casual reader that is interested in a book of this type would be beyond the horrific crimes they commit, because so many people are into true crime. But what is the last thing that people say? Was there a general theme of last words of people who are about to be executed?
Well, really, I thought that it was interesting. Some condemned inmates facing death were contrite. They apologized to families. They often wished that families would find some peace from their own execution. Some continued to be defiant, and their last words indicated that they weren't guilty, or that they were framed, or that it wasn't their fault. The things that I thought were interesting when you look at some of these, one was a condemned inmate from the state of Washington, Cal Colburn Brown, and interestingly, he murdered a woman after torturing her and getting her to get into his car, and he proceeded to torture her over a number of days. And then he was on his way to California to do the same thing to another woman. And he was caught by the police. And on his day of execution, he complained that he was being executed for only one murder, when the Green River Killer from Washington, who was responsible for more than 30 murders as a serial killer, only got life in prison. So it was an interesting perspective. And then another inmate from the state of Oklahoma, who in his last words said a cheer for the Oklahoma University sports programs. He said, as he laid there, he said, "Boomer sooner." And that was the last thing he could think of saying before he left this world. So
I'm not sure that was a kind of a booster that they were really looking to get.
Right. I don't know that they publicized that much in Norman, Oklahoma during the football games.
Did you see any kind of a theme going through it? As opposed, I know that we've got so many themes with the capital punishment these days. Maybe a disproportionate number of people of color. There's very few women. You did talk about the woman from Virginia who had her who hired the two. That was a pretty assorted tale.
Right.
How she hired the two fellas to kill her husband and stepson. That was pretty awful. And then you see through that, her IQ at the end. They talk about her having this IQ of only about 72. We know about the Atkins case. We know about how the Atkins case was a Supreme Court case that has said that you can't execute people that are mentally retarded or a certain amount of mental retardation, if you will, and that was a Virginia case as well. What are your themes? As I'm kind of throwing this broadly out there, but with IQ and race and so on, 46 people. How many were white? How many were black? What were their crimes?
Well, in Virginia, obviously, the only woman executed in 2010, as you said, was Teresa Lewis, it was a tragic case where she spent most of her time in prison after her conviction, counseling other inmates and was kind of an inspiration to other inmates on death row because of her positive attitude. What the Atkins decision out of Virginia said is that you cannot execute the mentally retarded or the intellectually disabled. And what the Supreme Court didn't do was tell us how we determine what mental retardation or intellectual disability is. Actually, Darrell Atkins, who the case was named for, went back to Virginia and was resentenced to death, even though his case stood for this proposition that you can't execute the mentally disabled. Ultimately, that case was overturned, and he was given life in prison for a reason entirely unconnected to his mental capacity. The intellectual disability issue is raised in many cases. And finally, the Supreme Court, again, just recently in Florida versus Hall, gave us a better idea of the issue with regard to intellectual disability when they said that you can't have kind of a bright line rule that says if your IQ is 70 or above, you're not intellectually disabled. But it's still murky, and it's raised in many cases in which the death penalty is sought. But in these particular cases through 2010, each of these people on average spent more than 16 years on death row. That I chronicle the trials and the appeals, and to say that there's sort of a recurring theme. One of the issues that many people contend that there's a racial bias is not so much in the person who is subject to the death penalty, but the victims. The victims who of cases who ultimately end with the death penalty are disproportionately white victims, and that is an issue that is being examined across the country. In fact, I'm serving on a committee in the state of Pennsylvania that is reviewing the death penalty in Pennsylvania, and in fact, Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania, who took office in January, has declared sort of a moratorium on the death penalty. He will not sign any more death warrants until our committee has completed its report. So, and that's one of the issues. Race is certainly an issue with regard to victims, and what the definition is of intellectual disability are issues that we're currently looking at in Pennsylvania.
Good afternoon. If you are just joining us, this is George Yates here with Justice for All, and we are live here in the studios here at K-Talk Radio, 1650 AM here in Portsmouth, Virginia. We are speaking with Matthew Mangino, who is a former district attorney of Lawrence County, Pennsylvania, and the author of The Executioner's Toll. And we're talking about the death penalty as it was carried out in the year 2010, where 46 people were executed. As a former prosecutor, did you prosecute death penalty cases in Pennsylvania? And we do know there is the death penalty in Pennsylvania. And We had Nick Yarrow on our show. I don't know if he was a Pennsylvania, served 20 years on death
he was
row
exonerated.
in Pennsylvania, was exonerated by DNA and all that. So we have some familiarity with Pennsylvania. Do you? How many years were you a DA, and are you still practicing law in Pennsylvania in regard to, in addition to your duties on this panel?
Yes. Well, yeah. I spent 2 terms as the district attorney in Lawrence County, Pennsylvania, which is just north of Pittsburgh. I did, in fact, try myself death penalty cases in our office. And after I left the district attorney's office, former Governor Rendell, appointed me to the parole board, where I spent a 6-year term in Pennsylvania on the parole board, and now I'm practicing law again with a law firm in Western Pennsylvania, Luxembourg, Garbutt, Kelly, and Georg, and in addition to the writing and other research that I do with regard to the law.
Well, now you mentioned that you picked 1 year because you wanted to give the reader a feel for this whole subject. How did you're a lawyer, you've prosecuted these cases, so maybe how do you think the average reader who reads this book is going to come away from this? If they were already pro-death penalty, are they going to is it going to change their mind? Or if they were anti-death penalty, are they going to be? Will it change anyone's mind? I guess I should say, because most people come in with some kind of an opinion on it.
Well, you're right. I mean, people do come in with an opinion on it, but I think that the book provides readers who are interested in this subject an opportunity to have a better understanding of how the system works, to have a better understanding. Often, when we hear about death penalty cases, it's normally at the time of execution, and they sort of run through the crime that occurred and that the person was convicted, and then maybe get comments from the family and the friends. This gives readers an opportunity to really see, what was involved with regard to the crime, what precipitated these crimes, how did these circumstances come about, and then ultimately, those issues of a condemned inmate after they've served their time in prison. What have they done while they've been in prison? What do others who had contact with them think of them? And that also I provided the perspective of not only the victim's family, which is extremely important here, but also the family of the condemned. So it sort of humanizes the process and gives readers an opportunity to get an inside look and draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, because each case you'll have the victim's family out there, and you'll have things like, well, that son of a bitch deserved to die,
right,
or the brother-in-law, or whoever was killed, and these kinds of things. I think the main, if you just go hang out at the beer garden and talk with your average person about capital murder, I think a lot of people sort of, I guess, believe in the death penalty in some way, but they think that it takes too long to execute people. They're on death row for 15 years, and like their Mother Teresa, by the time they get executed. I think a lot of people, this whole debate over lethal injection, I think gets people kind of, why in the world should we coddle these
right. killers?
Why do we care whether it's humane? I interviewed somebody that wrote a book about the folks that were the men that were hanged at Folsom Prison between 1895 and 1937. Seems like hanging at the gallows is more humane than some of these cases that we're talking about with lethal injection. What's that all about? What's the future of capital murder in the country, or capital, I should say, executions in the country going forward with all this debate over lethal injection?
Well, the United States Supreme Court has agreed to hear another lethal injection case. It was only about 7 years ago in a case named Bays versus Reese, in which the United States Supreme Court said that Kentucky's lethal injection process was humane. It was not cruel and unusual punishment. And now, only 7 years later, the Supreme Court is back hearing another case out of the state of Oklahoma. What's changed in 2008 when Bayes was decided, every state that had a death penalty was using a very similar drug protocol. It was a 3-drug protocol, basically the same type of drugs being used in this process. And so the Supreme Court said, hey, this process is not cruel and unusual. But now that drugs used in executions have become less available for a number of different reasons, states have now begun to go in different directions. In 2014, the first 5 executions in 2014 all used a different protocol. Some used 1 drug, other states used 2 drugs, some states used 3 drugs, changing up what the drugs were. Some were using pentobarbital, some were using midazolam. So the Supreme Court is now going to take another look at the lethal injection process. And I think that's important. The United States Supreme Court has never said that any form of execution is cruel and unusual punishment, whether it was hanging, the electric chair, gas chambers, firing squad, none. So some states are looking at alternatives to that. Utah has now said that they will use the firing squad again if they cannot find available lethal injection drugs. Oklahoma is looking at an entirely new execution process using nitrogen gas, nitrogen epoxy. So, we're going in a lot of different directions here. If you were gonna try to decide what is the most humane form of execution, obviously you would say whatever is swift and effective. We know lethal injection, if it's working the way it should, takes about 10 minutes. But we also know that if you use the firing squad, it takes about 15 seconds. So there's a debate about what is the most humane means of carrying out executions. And it's going to be interesting to see what the United States Supreme Court says with regard to lethal injection.
Just so we've got an overview for our listeners that and the readers of your book, do all 50 states have a death penalty, or just a few?
No, there are currently 31 states with a death penalty, and that's just come down by one state because Nebraska just outlawed the death penalty, which is an interesting story in and of itself because there have been a number of states that have eliminated the death penalty recently. Maryland was one, which recently, within the last couple of years, but within the last 7 to 8 years, Illinois has outlawed the death penalty. New York, New Jersey. So there's a number of states that have eliminated the death penalty recently. None of them were as conservative a state as Nebraska. So that is really an interesting turn of events, to have a more conservative law and order type state like Nebraska outlaw the death penalty. And they did it in dramatic fashion. The legislature voted to outlaw the death penalty. The governor vetoed it, and they overrode his veto.
Right, that was some big news. That was just a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, just in the last couple of weeks. So now we're down to 31 states that have the death penalty across the country. And then there's a couple of states, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, was one where Governor Wolf has refused to sign any death warrants. So there's kind of a moratorium here. Colorado has done the same thing, and Washington State. Those 3 governors have refused to carry out any death sentences by not signing death sentence warrants for execution. So, for all intents and purposes, there's only 28 states that are currently in a position to impose the death penalty. But what's even more interesting is in 2014, last year, there were 35 executions across the country. 28 of those executions occurred in Texas, Florida, and Missouri. So there are a number of states out there that haven't carried out an execution in 10 years. So
Virginia used to be a big hanging state, and we're not doing it as much as we used to.
Right. I mean, Virginia, for a period of time, had reduced the size of their death row more than any other state in the country by carrying out executions.
Hello. We've lost him.
We talk about it all the time on the show. Are you safe and secure online? Are you private? Leo Laporte here, the tech guy. Well, I've always said if you're on the internet, you're in public, but there are things you can do to protect yourself a little bit. You certainly should know what the risks are. We talk about that each and every week, plus all the latest news, gossip, and tech support. It's coming up this weekend right here with me, Leo Laporte, the tech guy.
Saturdays 8 p.m., Sundays 6 p.m. on K-Talk 1650.
RM Designs T-shirt printing and more is located in Smithfield, but serves all of Hampton Roads. They specialize in vinyl design shirts, apparel, window stickers, cups, and other specialty gifts. They also have rhinestone and embroidery designed apparel, and they offer Pandora-style beads and hardware to create a one-of-a-kind piece of jewelry. RM Designs T-shirt printing and more caters to businesses, sports teams, churches, groups, and family reunions. They also offer a great fundraising package should you be in need of money for a special project. And they also do home parties if you and your friends would like to get together and make your own creations. RM Designs T-shirt printing and more can be reached at 757-255-9140. That's 757-255-9140. Email them at rmdesigns11@aol.com or find them on Facebook at RM Twisted Designs. You can also place orders directly off their store at storeenvy.com/RM Twisted Designs.
Leaky faucet, refinishing old countertops? Hey, Gary Sullivan here. Perhaps you're restaining a deck or painting your living room. Whatever it is, let me help. I'm here to give you the tips you need to finish those pesky projects you've been putting off. If you're restaining, I have a tip for that. Can't get the paint off the hardwood floors? Got a tip for that too. I'm here to make sure that $5 repair doesn't turn into a $500 repair. Join me right here every weekend.
Saturdays at noon, Sundays at 9 a.m. on AM 1650 WHKT, The Answer.
Okay, we are back with Matthew Mangino. And sorry, we lost you there. I think somehow your phone just dropped off there, Matt. So anyway, are you back?
Hello.
Hello. We've got a little interference here on the line here. We are here on 1650 a.m. here. It's a beautiful day. If you're headed for the ocean front, I was on my way out to the studio. I couldn't get over how much traffic is out there, how many people are on the road headed for the beach today. But it's 100 degrees out there. How's the weather up in? Are you in Pennsylvania right now? Hello,
Georgia. I'm getting some feedback. I can't hear you.
Hold on. We've got the radio.
Okay, there we go.
All right. Now we've cleared that up. Okay.
Yes.
You know, we talked about, so there's 28 states effectively that are actually carrying out the death penalty, or at least prosecuting people for it. I guess a general theme is why did the 19 states that have outright banned it and the 3 states that have got it on, I guess, some kind of in limbo, what are the reasons against it and what are the reasons for it?
Well, I think traditionally there's probably a dozen states that just for ideological reasons within their state, their constituents in terms of the voters don't support the death penalty, and neither do their representatives in government, and they've traditionally not had a death penalty in those states. When the death penalty came back in 1976 after Furman versus Georgia, there were 38 states that had, or maybe 39 states that rewrote their laws and began to seek the death penalty in cases. And those states, have begun to to dwindle down to 31, and there are a number of reasons. Some have suggested the cost of the death penalty, because death penalties weren't being carried out.
So after Furman, which was the United States Supreme Court decision that came out and said that the death penalty was unconstitutional because it was just too arbitrarily, it was being arbitrarily administered, I suppose would be the quickest way to explain the holding. So it was banned all over the United States. So then after that, only 38 states even tried to reinstitute. Is that what you're saying?
Right, that's right.
What were those 12? Those 12 states, would you call them liberal states? Are they blue states? Are they Democratic kind of Republican states? Which states are those, so we can kind of get a feel for how this stacks up politically?
Yes, some of the states were New England states, Michigan, which was the first state in 1846 to abolish the death penalty. Minnesota, states that tended to be more left-leaning states, and that, as a matter of tradition in their states, they never had the death penalty. And what Furman essentially said was that the death penalty was arbitrary in the way it was being determined. Who was facing the death penalty, who was being tried for the death penalty, how those cases were being selected was being done in an arbitrary manner. They didn't say that the death penalty was unconstitutional and should be banned. They basically said the way it's being applied right now, it's arbitrary. So states went back and rewrote their death penalty laws to make them less arbitrary. And 4 years later, in 1976, in Gregg versus Georgia, the United States Supreme Court said these new state death penalty statutes were constitutional, and the death penalty began again. At that time, 38 of the states rewrote their laws so that they could seek the death penalty.
Well, isn't it still arbitrary in many respects? I mean, you talk about the fellow that killed and tortured the lady up in Washington State, and then I said, he was on his way to kill somebody else, but he was stopped. And I only killed one person, and the Green Run Killer killed 50 or however many. I remember the Green Run Killer. I was living in Washington in those days, but it is arbitrary when you kind of look at. You have some horrific crimes that don't get a death penalty treatment, and another one that might, and it's generally a charging decision made by the prosecuting attorney of each county or city where it's taken place, right? I mean, when you were the DA, you're the one that made the decision on whether you were going to go after the death penalty or not, correct?
Right, that's correct.
So it's not necessarily an arbitrary decision, but it's still, because there's a set of rules that are set up, but isn't that still kind of the complaint against it now? Is that it's kind of being applied in some cases and not all, and there's really it's kind of discriminatory in that manner?
Well, yeah, I think you make a good point, and it's a point that I raised in my book. One is originally with regard to Furman versus Georgia, the United States Supreme Court said that the death penalty was arbitrary in the way it was being imposed. So, one DA in one county could decide this is a death penalty case, and in a similar case in another county could decide the opposite. And the idea was that the death penalty would be applied to the worst of the worst. And the way they did that, as you know, is they created the bifurcated trial, where you have the trial phase, the guilt phase, where you determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty, then the penalty phase, decide whether you're going to apply the death penalty or life in prison. And the way they made that determination was through aggravating factors. Did you murder a child? Did you murder a police officer? Did you carry out the murder through torture and things like that? And so that was to separate these cases, the worst cases from the other cases, and then the death penalty would only be applied to the worst cases. So that dealt with that arbitrary in this issue with regard to imposition. I think where we're at now is it arbitrary in the way it's carried out. So if you have 3,000 people on death row and you're only executing 35, how did you select those 35? And how is it that somebody on death row in the state of Ohio who's only been there for 12 years could be executed before someone who's been there for 18 years? So I think we're facing an issue of arbitrariness in the manner in which it's carried out. How do you select who's going to be executed next and why? And how do you differentiate between one condemned person on death row from another? And so I think that's an issue that's going to have to be resolved with regard to the death penalty.
Well, how is it that that's happening? That somebody might only spend 12 years and someone else might spend 20.
Yeah. Well, it's the appeals process. Do you have the fortuity to have a skilled appellate lawyer who can slow your case down as opposed to another defendant who's on death row? In 2010 when I wrote this book, at least 3 of the executions were what are considered volunteers. They give up their appeal rights and they say, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm not going to appeal. I want to be executed. And in fact, in Pennsylvania, which has had the death penalty since 1978, there have been 3 executions carried out. Over 400 people on death row. 3 executions in Pennsylvania in that time period. All 3 of them were volunteers. There hasn't been an involuntary execution in Pennsylvania since 1962. So yeah, I mean there are a number of factors.
Is this because Pennsylvania just doesn't want to execute them, or is this because these folks have figured out ways to just delay it?
Yeah,
or both.
I think it's a matter. I think it's a matter of both, but particularly in Pennsylvania, the Third Circuit, which is the federal court which reviews habeas corpus petitions, which are when a condemned inmate asks for review by the federal court, have tended not to make favorable decisions in terms of the prosecution. And there's a very vigorous and skilled Philadelphia Defenders Association, which lends itself to all death row inmates, and they've been able to essentially block every effort to carry out executions. Governors before Governor Wolf have signed, execution warrants, but there hasn't been a single involuntary execution in the modern era of the death penalty in Pennsylvania.
Well, you mentioned cost earlier, and I think a lot of people are now saying, wait a minute, this costs too much, it takes too long, it's arbitrarily applied, and does it really deter future crime? I mean, why do we still have this death penalty if it seems like we're one of the few countries in the world that still does it. Why in the world don't we just get rid of it and move on? I think sometimes the victim's family suppose need that, but by the time it's carried out, don't so many of them forgive the killer by the time that he gets executed anyway?
Well, yeah, I mean, in my book, if you read through, you'll certainly see where some families of victims have been opposed to the death penalty. Some of them have forgiven. Some of them just don't want to have anything to do with it. They want some closure, and they don't want to be a part of this process that goes on for years and years and years. On the other hand, though, you do see some who say, "Hey, lethal injection was too easy. My loved one was tortured and murdered, and it looks like this guy just went to sleep." So you see it from both sides.
What about the cost versus the cost deterrent? What is it really of value in our modern society? I know you're on a commission now in Pennsylvania. You're very experienced. You're former district attorney, been around writing books and all of this. And what is are you allowed to even have an opinion publicly on it since you're on a commission? How do you feel about that?
Well, my opinion is, and I think that there's a couple of factors that weigh into this, but in a lot of ways, the death penalty has been used as a political prop. If you're running for the legislature or you're running for district attorney, it's easy to say, "Listen, I'm a law and order guy. I support the death penalty." And we've gotten to the point where sometimes a candidate who is opposed to the death penalty is weak on crime. So in a lot of ways, it's a good thing for politicians to have around because they can stake out their claim to be law and order candidates.
And it's hard for a legislature to abolish it because they'll have the same problem when they're running for re-election. It took a lot of courage on that Nebraska legislature,
right,
because that's a conservative state. How in the world does that happen that you can abolish it? Because that's really, I guess, if you're gonna get rid of it, you got to get rid of it at the state level anyway.
Right. There is a federal death penalty, but
right.
These are state laws, and the death penalty is most frequently applied in state homicide cases, first-degree murder. So, so I think that politics plays a role in the death penalty. So we don't often get the kind of clear analysis of the process. There's cost involved, and I think the tide is turning to a certain extent because traditionally law and order conservative states are now looking at the cost of the death penalty. Why are we paying for these elaborate experts and these prolonged trials and appellate review for these cases when we wouldn't have to pay for that if we didn't have a death penalty? I mean, in Pennsylvania, for instance, if you try a death penalty case, you're gonna the state is going to most likely pay for a lawyer for the guilt phase, the trial part of the case, and then they're going to pay for another lawyer for the penalty phase, and you're going to hire mitigation experts and other experts. The costs are enormous, and normally those costs all fall on the state unless someone has the means to pay for their own lawyers and their own experts. Then the appellate review goes on and on and on. Death penalty condemned inmates are segregated in a more supervised situation, which costs money over time. So there are costs related to the death.
Death row is cruel and unusual punishment in many respects, from what I've been able to determine from some of the people that we've interviewed on our show.
Yeah, certainly. It's almost like segregated housing. It's almost like being in solitary confinement, where you only have a couple of hours or less a day in the yard, where you're outside and you're in a cell by yourself. It's certainly not a pleasant place to be. And it costs a lot of money to have that type of segregated
death row
housing.
itself. If you've just joined us, I'm George Yates. This is Justice for All, and we've been here for the last hour with Matthew Mangino, who's the former district attorney in Pennsylvania. On your commission that you are a member of, what are the issues before your joint commission when you're trying to determine the capital punishment penalties in Pennsylvania? Are you trying to determine or what its deterrent value is? What is the cost of it? What is its value to society? What is the purpose of your commission?
Right. The commission was created by the Pennsylvania Senate, and it's a joint government committee, and we're reviewing the death penalty, and we're looking at a whole number of things, including the costs, including any racial issues that relate to the death penalty, whether it's those on death row or those who are victims. We're looking at generally lethal injection and that whole process. So it's really an expansive charge from the Senate with regard to review of the death penalty, and it's very intensive in terms of trying to get as much data as we can from local counties, so that we can, so that really this the decisions that we make are going to be, evidence based. They're not going to be anecdotal. We've spent a great deal of time looking at data and research out there, and we hope to have a report to the governor, by the end of the year.
And so this report, is the governor going to use this then to go back to the legislature, continue his moratorium on the death penalty? What is the purpose of the report?
Well, the purpose of the report, the governor wants guidance into, what, his future intentions are. Obviously, the governor can't outlaw the death penalty. The legislature is going to have to do that.
Right.
But before he, his position has been before he makes a decision on whether or not he's going to work to abolish the death penalty, or that the death penalty can be corrected in some way so that the state is carrying out death penalty executions in a more effective way. He wants this report to create his approach to the death penalty.
The Supreme Court once said, I'm not sure what case it was, that death is different. What case,
yes.
What case was that? Atkins?
No, I don't know.
But I guess the reason I say it is because my question, I think I've had it here on my little sheet of questions to ask you, and that is, was anyone in 2010 of those 46 people, was any one of them innocent? Any chance whatsoever that they're innocent? I mean, I think that's a lot of the argument against the death penalty, isn't it? That we might have executed an innocent man. So can we answer that question? Do we ever execute innocent people?
Well, right now, no one can point to a factually innocent person who's been executed in this country since the modern era of the death penalty. Now, there are some cases in which there is, in which there are questions. There's the Willingham case out of Texas, which was an arson, in which the defendant's children were killed in the house. He was ultimately convicted and executed. There's some question now about the experts who testified in that case and the science that they used to determine whether that was an arson. There have been people exonerated from death row through DNA.
And you mentioned the Coleman case in Virginia, where they actually went back and he had been executed. They went back to check his DNA, and sure enough, he was guilty. So
he was guilty. Yeah, so it works both ways. There's no question that the Coleman case was really a blow to the abolitionist movement, because they had put so much credence into his position, and then it turned out post-execution that he was in fact the killer of his sister-in-law.
So plenty of people, guilty people, deny their guilt all the way to the hangman's noose, and it turns out that they were lying all the way to the end.
Yeah, that's true, and there were a number of cases like that in 2010 where they continue in the face of evidence that was unquestionable that they were innocent. But the issue with regard to exonerations, there have been people exonerated from death row by DNA. It was about 17 over the course of 40 years, but none of those persons had been executed, thankfully. So there have been no post-execution exoneration.
Are they still doing that? Are they still trying to, now that it's possible, to go back and see? I mean, we did it in the Coleman case, but is that actually being done?
Well, that's the only case I know of where they were a governor. I think it was Governor Warner, who ordered the post-execution DNA, because really after execution, there's really no way to. There's no mechanism to test that. To get an order of court to test that DNA. In this case, the governor ordered it. I don't know of any other case that's similar to that. In this Willingham case, for instance, in Texas, we're never going to know unequivocally because there is no DNA. What's been called into question is the experts and the science that was used. So we'll never know 100% if that was a mistake. But the Supreme Court has said that when it comes to due process and death penalty cases, condemned inmates get super due process. I mean, the review process is arduous, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. We hope that if there are mistakes, they're corrected. If the appellate courts are working the way that they do, but we know just by the very nature of the law, beyond a reasonable doubt is not beyond all doubt. It's not to 100% certainty, and the Supreme Court has said, hey, we know there are going to be mistakes in criminal cases. People who are innocent are going to get convicted.
Beyond the political nature of it, does society need a death penalty? I mean, do people, let's say, do people need it as opposed to politicians?
Yeah. Well, here's one example that I can give. The last execution in 2010 was a guy named John David Duty. He was from Oklahoma. He's serving 3 life sentences for other homicides and violent crime that he was involved in. And he decides he had it in prison. He doesn't want to stay. He's not going to stay there. Doesn't want to commit suicide. Isn't going to try to escape. So what he does is he has a cellmate who he coaxes into this scheme that how they're going to get separate cells. And the long and the short of it, he murders the guy. He murders his cellmate, then sits down, writes a letter to his cellmate's mother, telling him, I just killed your son. Then he writes a letter to the DA and taunts the DA, saying, listen, I want the death penalty. If you don't give me the death penalty, I'm going to continue to kill, and next time it's going to be staff. Well, what do you do with a guy like that? I mean, where do you put him?
In solitary confinement, I suppose. But
the question is, even in solitary confinement, people have to feed you. People have to let you out in the yard. I mean, I think John David Duty is one example of a situation where maybe the death penalty is warranted.
Right.
And this person is a threat to society and will continue to be if you let him kill at a whim.
Right, and I know I interviewed. There was a book that we had a judge in California that wrote a book about a fellow that was able to kill from prison, from Folsom Prison, and he sent one of his inmate friends who got paroled out to kill some of the people that had testified against him while he was in prison.
Right. Yeah.
So, some people that continue to kill even from within prison, it's pretty hard to make the argument that life imprisonment is the way to go when, in fact, they can still continue to kill both people inside and outside the prison after they've been sentenced. So there is probably definitely a need for it in those cases in there.
Right.
Listen, this has been a great time. Is there anything that you'd like to say about your book before we sign off, Matthew?
Yeah, I really appreciate being with you today, George. I would say the book's available on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com, McFarlandPublishing.com as well, the publisher of the book, or on my website at Matt Mangino, MattMangino.com.
Yeah, that's great. And I wanted to say thanks for being on the show with us, and for those of you out there. And, of course, I'll put this show, we're going to put it up on YouTube. We'll also list it on my website, and so I'll go ahead and list those ways of getting your book on those two media outlets. And I wanted to do a shout-out to your publishers, McFarland. They're a great group. They do and you and your fellow authors, I'm interviewing a lot of them, so it's been great. So
they've been good.
Yeah, okay. Well, then that's great. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Have a great weekend.
You too. See ya.
All right. So that was Matthew Mangino, and he was the former district attorney in Pennsylvania, serving on a joint commission in Pennsylvania on their advisory committee on capital punishment, and he lives in Pennsylvania. So if you've just joined us, we've been with him for the last hour. The name of the book, again, is The Executioner's Toll, 2010. And what he did was he went through and he made a survey of of all the folks that were executed in the United States in the year 2010. So pick up that book, and it's a great reference book if you're interested in the whole idea of capital punishment in America, and that's what these McFarland folks do. So I'm really excited about our relationship, the show's relationship with McFarland Publishing. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm George Yates. This is Justice for All. Join us again next Saturday at 2 o'clock, and we'll have another great author on board to talk about some great book that he's just written, and you'll enjoy it, I'm sure. So have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.
News. I'm Jim Taylor. Hillary Clinton addressing thousands on New York City's Roosevelt Island.